Come be a part of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics with your host, Dr. Ed Holliday. Hear the voices of liberty speaking all across America. Doc Holliday provides thought-provoking interviews and commentary about the issues and actions that are afflicting this country and what we need to do to get America back on track. Get fired up, get inspired, get on board with Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics right now.
And here we go.
And once again, that's the sound of rock cracking as the summer heats up. This summertime now across America. We've had riots, looting, we've had protesters, peaceful protesters, and last week we had a Trump rally. So what is going on in America now? What voices do you need to hear? We got two voices you'll hear today on Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. Very important for message for all of America. They happen to be African American. First, I'm going to play a clip from Fox News with our friend, Dr. Alveda King, the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She and I wrote a book together a few years ago that you can get, and we'll tell you about at our midway break how you can get that book. But I want you to hear her voice in these times of uncertainty, times of questioning, times of what should we do, what should you do. She has a message that I believe is beautiful, that brings us together. We're going to play that in just a minute. And then we have an interview with our friend, the Reverend William Owens. He's got a new book called A Dream Derailed. I've mentioned this book before, but I've just now been able to get him on the show. So we have a great interview about his new book, A Dream Derailed, Reverend William Owens. And again, I've known him for many years and helped him with his book and get that edited. He's just a great storage of knowledge. And he was there in the civil rights movement. He marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And he was part of sit-ins and getting students together back in the 1960s. So I do want you to just sit back and listen to this show. Listen how it speaks to you. Listen as Alveda King tells you something that you can do, that we can do as Americans to bring this nation together. Listen to what William Owens says in his book. And if you don't have his book, order his book. I'll have a link. But every American should have his book. And if you know some friends that are dealing with this issue and wondering what to do, get this book, A Dream Derailed by Reverend William Owens. We'll have him on, and we got a link to it. So get that book ordered, because it's very important that America is educated in what Alveda King says, what Reverend William Owens says, and that's why you look at who we've had on this show. Go back in our archives before everything was going and saying, hey, Black Lives Matter. We got to look at black lives. We've had black lives that matter on this show for years and years, because their voice is so important for the future of America. And we have African American voices who are not afraid to speak up against socialism and against these things that are taking America in the wrong direction. So go back in our archives, listen to the voices that are speaking to you, and especially today with Dr. Alveda King. Let's play this from Fox News. Our good friend, Dr. Alveda King, here she is on Fox News last week.
Joining us now with her message on this important day is the niece of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. and Fox News contributor, Dr. Alveda King. Good morning to you, Dr. King.
Good morning, Ainsley. How are you?
I'm great. This is a day that we celebrate. And it's extremely important this year because of the climate. What's your message to the nation?
This Jubilee is very important. I call it Jubilee Juneteenth. So Juneteenth should be accompanied by a great celebration of liberation, along with repentance and restoration. As Director of Civil Rights for the Unborn, for example, I'm waiting for a Juneteenth or a Jubilee for the babies in the womb. However, this one is dealing with skin color, although we are only one race and one blood. So Juneteenth means that 2 years after the Emancipation Proclamation, it took 2 years for the slaves in Texas to find out that blacks were free. And we do celebrate that. What's so important this Juneteenth is that there's anarchy and turbulence and race wars, skin color race wars in America. So it's time to put that down, to celebrate as human beings, liberation, jubilee, and prayerfully repentance.
You wrote an op-ed on Fox News that is beautifully written, and the first line says this, pretty powerful. It says, "This might be the year Juneteenth gets the respect it deserves. It's about time." Well said, Dr. King. Why did you write this?
I believe as an African-American woman, I'm 70 years old, much turbulence, much fighting about skin color and racism, about which race is better than the other. We're all human beings. My uncle, Martin Luther King Jr., said we must learn to live together as brothers, I will add as sisters, or perish together as fools. So I know that Juneteenth is very important. I've been celebrating it most of my life, actually, because we were always aware of it. So I think that it's very important during this Juneteenth for us to learn to come together, resolve our differences, celebrate Juneteenth. I'll be in Tulsa tomorrow with President Trump. And, you know, there was a terrible atrocity in the black community called Black Wall Street. And I think it's time to make amends for some of those things, to move forward together as Americans, not colorblind, we can see each other, but learning how to work together. So Juneteenth is still a time of celebration for me, but it's a time of serious action where we've got to reconcile in this nation.
And that was Alveda King, Dr. Alveda King, right there on Fox News last week, talking about Juneteenth and getting behind making that a national holiday. And let's look into that. I think we could celebrate together the end of slavery. All Americans should celebrate that the nightmare was over finally for every slave in America on Juneteenth. An announcement made down in Galveston, Texas. And what a voice that Dr. Alveda King has, and a soothing voice. In this time of crisis, she brings peace and clarity and action that can draw us together. And so I'm so glad she was on Fox News last week. She's a regular contributor there. And now I want to take a moment to play just the final part of her uncle's famous speech, I Have a Dream speech, back in 1963. When I heard Dr. Alveda King on Fox News, I contacted her and let her know I believe the theme of Juneteenth should be these words with her uncle there, with the passion he gave him, to give that the passion America needs to push forward and bring us all together. So take a minute to listen to these words. What passion Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. had, and he had a vision that America would come together. He had a vision that we will get together. And so let's do that, America. Work hard that we can be together, working forward and building up America and making it better, a more perfect union. And with that, let's go into this conversation with Reverend William Owens and about his new book, A Dream Derailed. On our show today, I'm glad to have the author of the book, A Dream Derailed, and that is the author is the Reverend Bill Owens, and we've had him on the show before in the past, and he's a very intelligent, wonderful American who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He's been involved in education and in civil rights for many, many years and decades now. And he grew up in the segregated South, and he's the founder and president of the Coalition of African American Pastors. And I just want to say welcome to Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics, Reverend Owens.
Thank you. I'm glad you're having me. Honored to be with you.
Well, it's an honor to have you on our show. And for our listeners to know, we've been friends for many years now. And in your book, A Dream Derailed, is a new book you just got out. And I had the honor to do some editing on the book, and to me it's an outstanding piece of literature that's really meant for today. When I say that, you have written this book, and it talks a lot about the civil rights movement and what we have today with President Trump and this onslaught of powers that once were in control, and Donald Trump became president, and the status quo that is not helping them anymore. The powers that were once in place, and we see so many people trying to push President Trump out of the White House, and now we have these with the killing of George Floyd, and it was murder, and everybody's condemned it. In fact, President Trump has really gone out of his way to condemn that action and look at police reforms, and yet there's this part of society that is rioting and looting, and now in the city of Seattle we have where they've taken over and declared it their own country. So what do you see what's going on, Reverend Owens?
Well, what's going on is it's a dress rehearsal for things to come if we don't pull this in. They're doing this to see how far they can go, and they plan to do a lot more. They want to turn this country around into a communist country. And it has happened in history many times, and we must stand and not allow that to happen to America. This is a Christian country, and we love our country, and all this stands for, with all of its flaws. It's a great country, the greatest country in the world. I think it's the greatest country that ever has been, and they don't like it. They want to destroy America, and they're doing all they can to make races against race. People against police departments. All of this is insanity. What will we do without a police department? Who do you call if you have an emergency? You call 911. So it's all absurd. But we must stand up for what is right and use godly values in this country.
Well, one of the things you talked about, it is absurd to think, a place without police, and so we got some of these snowflakes, and people just think everybody's going to be wonderful to each other, and that's just not true. There's we live in a fallen world. There's sin in the world, and there's people who do murder, do rape, do cause harm, do rob and steal, and it's sad, but that's true. If we live by the Ten Commandments, and you say in your book that we should go back and look at the Ten Commandments, and we should post the Ten Commandments in public. So how do you think Ten Commandments, are those old laws, or will they be effective for society today?
But they're old laws, but they're for eternal. They are good. They were good then, and they're good now. We still need the Ten Commandments.
And appreciate you saying that, and I'm with you on that. We definitely need that. I wish you'd speak to the concern. One reason there are and a lot of peaceful protesters, and I've told my listeners I participated in a rally for justice for George Floyd, because peaceful protesting is the way we get our frustrations out, and so there's nothing wrong with peaceful protesting. I know back in the Tea Party days, and other day in times when the IRS was targeting conservative groups, and I protested and marched. But I guess what I want you to talk to our listeners, there is this need in the African American community. There's an anger and a reason for a rightful anger, but it seems to me it may be being exploited by Antifa and other groups. So where do you come down with, I guess, Black Lives Matter? That phrase is important because Black lives do matter, and yet there's a group called Black Lives Matter that's very anti-God, anti-Bible, and anti what Americans really stand for. So do you have a distinction with that group called Black Lives Matter?
Well, Black Lives Matter, they have hijacked the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. It is true that Black lives matter, but all lives matter. And what we're seeing is they're hijacking good people that mean well. And because of blacks made such in this country, they made such a difference with the civil rights movement of 50-some years ago, with marching and protesting, but it was done with love. I marched with Dr. King, and you have to have love in your heart. And before you could get out there on the front line, you had to be tested. Can you stand what they do to you? They set us at counters and hit us upside our head, knock us off the stool. And if you reacted out of hate, you could not do it. You could not be on the front line. These people, they come in the door doing wrong, burning, stealing, breaking windows. It's all wrong. But go back to the civil rights movement, and Dr. King taught love. I remember when they bombed his house. His family were in the house. And Dr. King stood on his front porch when people wanted to use weapons and go get them who did it and kill them, slaughter them. Dr. King stood on love. And he said, no, you cannot do that. We must love our enemies, love those that despitefully use you. So he would not do that. So he calmed the people. It was not violence, never violence.
So do you see that anywhere today in any of the Black Lives Matter or any of the protesting groups? Do you see that love?
I don't see it anywhere today. Nowhere. And there's some legitimate protesters out there, but they're drowned out by the people who want to do harm. They're drowned out by the Black Lives Matter and Antifa and all of that group. They're drowned out by them. They don't mean good. They don't mean black people good. They don't mean American good.
Well, Reverend Owens, one thing, and there's a very important question that some of the listeners have asked me about, and it's my concern too. We do see this overwhelming, and part of it is a righteous anger in the black community, and as far as need for police reforms. But if there's so much anger, there's one of my listeners said, for 50 years now, the majority, or over 90% of African Americans have voted for the Democratic Party. If they're so angry, and the Democrats are in control of every major big city in America, and in Minneapolis where this happened, it was under a Democratic mayor, a Democratic governor, Democrat senators in that state of Minnesota. So would the black population ever be so frustrated that to say, let's give up, let's try the Republican Party just one time? Would that ever happen? Could that happen between now and November?
Maybe it can happen, but what is happening, Dr. Holliday, all of these people are listening to CNN and the liberal television station. So that's all they know. All they know is what's happening, what they show. And they show everything Democrat. And Democrat Party has ruined this country. And everybody needs to have my book, A Dream Derailed. They need to get that book if they don't have it. It's like a culmination of what is happening now. I think the book is very timely because I didn't know this would happen, but it has happened. And it's all spelled out in my book, A Dream Derailed, what they were doing, what they have done for the last 50 years, and where we are today in America.
And I'll tell my listeners, I did help edit this book, and just what Reverend,
did a good job.
What Reverend Owens said was the fact that it's very timely. Everything in his book, and nobody could ever known about coronavirus and this rioting and looting, and yet your book has the answer and the really solution to all this that's going on. And I wish you well. I wish everybody in America could read this book. I wish our listeners, I hope they'll get that book. And tell our listeners how they can get the book, Reverend Owens.
They can get that book on Amazon, or they can go to any bookstore and place an order. They can come to our website, capusa.org. Ed for All. They can email us at edforall, EDFORALL, the number 2 @gmail.com. It stands for Education for All. EDFORALL, the number 2 at gmail.com. Call us to get this book. Everybody should have this book because this book tells about everything that is happening today. How 50 years has been built up with the Democrats doing what they do, and we need to educate the public, the black community, about the real Democrats who use us as pawns, pretend they love us and don't. And I go back in the book, I tell about how President Lyndon Johnson, under his administration, hired 100,000 social workers to go throughout America, get black women who were pregnant, had two little children, to get them on welfare, but put the father out of the home. That destroyed the black family. And that's the reason you see so many black men in prison and unaccomplished, because they were reared without a father in the home, because it was by design. 100,000 social workers telling black women with babies, had children, get on welfare and put the father out of the home. That destroyed the black family.
And I think a lot of our listeners don't understand. They were going around and they could only get on welfare if there was no man in the house, and they were checked on to make sure there was no man in the house. They had people go in to make sure if any man was in the house, they'd get kicked off welfare. So
that's right.
And that's a story that most Americans have never understood or never known about. Right.
They don't know that. They don't, and they would send social workers in the home, and if there were men had their clothes in the house or shoes, they would put them off of welfare. So women were afraid, and they got hooked on that check like a drug. Get me the welfare check.
Well, that another part of the book, and I'm glad to say that, and that's why people need to read it. And every American, and especially our African American listeners, you do have a section on what to do. 10 things
Absolutely.
that American can do, and 10 things Black America can do. And one of them, where you talk about ending racism, and we know that word race, and we've had Dr. Alveda King on our program, and we've talked about her and talking about how she brings from the Bible. We are one blood, one race, and that's how God made us. So when we talk about, well, you use the word racism, if somebody uses the word racism, or if you're a racist, you automatically say you buy in that myth that we are different races. We're one race, and that's something I think you really point out well in your book, and that there is a problem of favoritism. People will favor someone because of the same skin color, or hurt them or discriminate against them because of the same, a different skin color, and yet that you talk about how racism, that word, just disregards all that. And when you call somebody a racist, then you're condoning the myth that we are different races. I mean, we're not. We're just one race.
Right. And Dr. Holliday, I want to take this time to thank you for the hard work you put in us bringing this book out. You worked with us, you and about 4 more people, because this book goes extensively into research. We can't put stuff out there and say it unless we can prove it. So we had worked over 2 years on the book, and I said, where is the research? Because the things we're saying, if we can't prove it, it won't do any good. So you helped us do that, Dr. Holliday, and I thank you very much.
Well, I'm so glad to help be a part of it, because this is such a book that really, like I said, the entire country needs to read it. Now, I wish CNN and MSNBC and everybody else had you on. I don't know if they would or not, but they should. I know you've been on the Don Lemon show on CNN before, but he probably won't invite you back, will he?
No, he won't invite me back, no.
You stood your ground and made him look very foolish.
Right.
But one of the things I'd like to get to is, again, when we talk about African Americans and history, and one of the reasons I love your book, and because you have lived it, you don't have to go back and research it. I mean, you grew up in Jim Crow South and segregated South. Tell our listeners just a little bit about how, because I know you grew up in dirt poor poverty right in Memphis, Tennessee.
That's right. As a matter of fact, Memphis, Tennessee was very segregated and they gave us a place, and we had to stay in that place, or you subject getting killed. Anything could happen. I remember when my aunt died in Mississippi years ago. I just finished college, was teaching school, and she died, and we had to go down to the funeral. I told my parents that this is the way we'll do it. We'll go daylight, come back home daylight. I will not be caught in Mississippi at night, because we were afraid of the things that could happen during that time. But how things have changed now. I don't have that problem now. How things have changed in 30, 40 years in America for the good. Although there are a lot of problems, things have happened for the good with Black America.
And I know because of the George Floyd protest, and people go, well, we haven't changed much. But, I mean, just that fact, what you said, the people don't realize the true villainy and the Ku Klux Klan and what fear they put in to where you wouldn't even want to be in Mississippi when the sun went down. And I know you've been at my house, you've been to Mississippi overnight many times in the past few years. So there is progress in that respect, that's for sure.
A lot of progress, Dr. Holliday.
And then, and that's the one thing with people who want to tear this country apart and say it was a broken system from the very beginning. They want to rip out what our founding fathers said and rip out the Constitution. I'm thinking, no, it was this Constitution with all the flaws, and wherever you find a human being, you're going to find flaws. There's no perfection on this earth. And yet we have got the greatest nation in the world, in the history of the world, and you got people who want to throw it, just tear it apart and say, we got to start over. So what would be your answer to them?
We must build on what we've done. We'll have several hundred years of building in America, and it didn't happen overnight. A lot of this country was built on love and biblical principles. These people that arrived and doing all, they have no biblical principles in them whatsoever. They are deceitful. They're trying to destroy America. They don't respect God. But this country was built on that. This country, the ills that were done to Black people, because of the Constitution, we could use those grievances. We could go to the courts and get relief. We could go and get help for the things that we're doing wrong to us. You can't do that in any other country. No other country can people do what they do in America. The ills, the wrong, the sin, the corrupt things people did to Black people, look how far we have come. We must take that in consideration. In my lifetime, the things I've seen, the changes I've seen, and I can travel anywhere in the United States today.
And just you saying that's why your book to me is so valuable as a treasure for American history, in fact, and you do want to move America forward. Anybody who reads your book understands that, and one of the things that makes it, like I said, makes it powerful because you've lived it. Because if you don't mind me asking, can I ask how old you are now, Reverend Owens?
I'm 81 years old. I work every day. I have 2 little children, 7 and 8 years old. Well, I'm one of the most blessed men in the world.
I want our listeners to understand that you're a family man, and you got children, what, 7 and 8 years old. Unbelievable.
That's right. I got a son, 8, and a little daughter, 7.
And you got a beautiful wife. I've seen her, and you met her in Oklahoma, didn't you?
At Oral Roberts University in Tulsa, Oklahoma.
And that's is amazing because knew Oral Roberts very well, the spiritual side of things, and also our listeners may not know there's something called 1908. You had the revival out in California, and
right.
What was that called? Azusa Street revival.
Azusa Street, where our presiding bishop, Bishop C.H. Mason, received the Holy Ghost, and I was born naturally in his church. He was over the Church of God in Christ. He was the leader, but he pastored a local church. And when I was born, my mother was a member of that church in Memphis, Tennessee. And
he was your first pastor in life.
Yes, that's right.
So you have some spiritual connections to our country, long, deep roots, and I just want our listeners to know that. And Reverend Owens, we're so happy that you've been on our show. There is an election coming up in November, and I know you founder of the Coalition of African American Pastors, and that's a nonprofit group. So I'm not going to ask you to put any, because I know they don't back any candidate or anything, but individually, do you have anything to say about this election coming up? People need to look for how to vote.
Yes, people should look at the issues. Don't go by what CNN tell you. Look at the issues and vote godly principles. If they're not godly principles, don't vote for them.
Well, I think that's just simple and is easy to up there to try to figure out how the best way to vote. So I appreciate you coming on our show, and I hope everybody will go out and get your book, A Dream Derailed. You told everybody how to get that book, and I'm going to put a link to your book on our website there, so anyone can go to the website and it'll have a link to your book. And I hope you sell millions of copies, and everybody will read your book, and we'll have a better country if they do. And we will have a better country if everybody will read A Dream Derailed by Reverend William Owens. And so go to the front page or website there where we talk about this show. I have a link right to his book where you can order it on his website. And get one for your friends. Order several books and hand them out. It's important that America is educated so that we don't have foolish millennials, foolish people who get a college degree and then they go out and want socialism. And we're seeing that happen. You can be a part of stopping that by helping get Reverend Owens' book out to everyone, to someone who marched with Dr. Martin Luther King. We need Americans to stand up now and be counted. So get this show link. It's very important to have healing words. And evangelist Alveda King, what healing words that she used. And you hear Dr. Reverend William Owens, how important his life has been on walking on this earth with people he's walked with that have deep spiritual roots. He's walked with a march with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. So get this link out to this show. Let people hear healing words of bringing America together to make us better, a more perfect union. That's my challenge to you. That's my cry for America. And that's why I want this show to get out, send out the link. And God bless you. We'll be back next week with another great show with Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics.
Thanks for joining us today, and remember to listen again next week for another edition of Doc Holliday's Rock Splitting Politics. You can order Ed's new book, Bedrock Truths, by clicking on the book cover right in front of you on the screen, or visit docholliday.org. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you again next week.